91. You're the first, I mean, I've heard it before. Out of all the churches that we've tried, I have not found anybody that talks about it like you do. So consider us very lucky.
Very much.
Yeah,
because
well, there's so much there
It
that
explains.
most preachers can't go through that. It takes about a year to break it all down, so I thought this way was probably the fastest way you do it at home and we'll ask questions about it, whatever. And I think that's really important, that helps us get to know one another a little bit better.
We're talking about the temperaments. They said, Mike said that he hasn't been in a church where they teach it. So just for the people watching is what he was saying. And so we are blessed to be able to learn stuff like that here. And I think that we're blessed to be in a place where we can know each other and pray for people and see prayer requests answered and feel responsible for those. If you're doing your job and praying, I feel like you are somewhat responsible for some of the prayers that are answered, and it's always good. It makes you feel better, which is what it's supposed to do, and it makes you feel connected, and that's what we've been really talking about in the past, seems like a couple months, is trying to figure out a way to build the church, not necessarily numbers, but like build the strength of the church. And I feel like it's really been taken off more than I've seen in a long time. And we used to have a lot of people come, but I was younger then and didn't really understand it and wasn't a part of it. But it seems to me like it's really taken off and getting a lot bigger. Do you have an extra book? Extra book. We're on day 61 in our book. Day 61 in our study book. It's on YouTube. On Wednesdays, we do it on YouTube Live on the church's channel. Page 290, guys. We're doing this book, 90 Days with Paul. It's pretty much giving us an in-depth study of the life of Paul and a lot of things we wouldn't see just normally. We're on page 292, and I'm reading out of Acts. Is everybody from Oklahoma? You guys? No. I don't know why I want to say this, but just been on my mind. Has anybody heard of the Tulsa race riots? Okay, so they don't teach that in school or anything, and it's a big part of our history. I've read like 20 books about it, but that's a disturbing part of our history, and you see that with Paul here, where they're trying to run him out of town for no reason other than for what he's doing, what he's preaching and stuff like that. It's just a horrible moment in Oklahoma history that we sweep under the rug, but we're not perfect, and that was just over 100 years ago, and it's still happening today in the other country. What's the name of the country what is it? Nigeria, where they're just eliminating Christians. How lucky are we to live where we are, where we can talk about it, we can put it on the internet, we can do whatever you can do, and that goes completely the other way too. You can talk about whatever you want and put it on there, but I'm happy that we're here doing what we're doing. Acts 24, I am reading 22 through 27. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know that uttermost of your matter. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. After a certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, Go thy way, for this time, when I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the offner and communed with him. But after 2 years, Perseus Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. And I say this every week, but if you're reading the Bible in a year, it's great. I'm the one that encourages it. I think it's amazing. But I blast right through it. And this part right here is something I'm like, okay, well, I don't even know what's going on here. And that's what we're doing here is we're taking a little dive into this and seeing what's going on here. And these I'm doing 4 days tonight. One of them's going to be real short, but one of these days has like the scariest thing that I ever saw as a child in church, and it's where they say, "Almost thou persuadeth me to be a Christian." It gives me chills every time I hear it or read it or whatever. That is the saddest thing that I think, and the most terrible thing that can be in the Bible. So keep that in mind as we're studying these people here. I'm reading on page 293. As we begin today's reading, my mind drifts back over the many stops we've made with the Apostle Paul. I suppose none of us wants to trade times, places, and live with him. I told my friend a while back, I was like, I feel like I'm an old soul, like I should have been born in the 1800s and all that. And he said, yeah, but there's no penicillin back then. I was like, there you go. But each of us must admit that Paul's tenure on earth was extremely fascinating. He could write about the breadth, the length, the depth, and the height because his experience each of those extremes. This man we're studying in God's Word was flesh and blood, but he was extraordinary. We always have to remember who Paul is. Paul was Saul before he's Paul, and he is a persecutor. That's what makes me think of like the Tulsa race riots when I've compared him to Hitler. There's so much closer, even, times that's happening currently that would have been Paul would have been or Saul would have been a part of before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. He would have been the people in Nigeria. We would have been one of those people before he met Jesus, which is an incredible thing to think about. Acts 24 unfolds with Paul incarcerated in Sisera after being escorted by a grand cavalry. Ananias, the high priest, arrived with an entourage, including a lawyer named Tyrillus, who brought the charge against Paul before the governor. Few things are more disgusting than a political spiel to bear no resemblance to the truth. And we see that with elections going on yesterday. That's all you hear. Nobody knows what the truth is. I don't think the people that are doing it don't know what the truth is. Tyrillus began by flattering Felix the governor. Judging by the lawyer's words, Felix deserved his own holiday for being a peacemaker, a reformer, a tireless officer, and a noble man. Tyrillus knew better. Felix was vile and incompetent. Nero had him recalled only 2 years later. He was a former slave who had cunningly gained favor with the imperial court, known for his violent use of repressive force and corrupt self-aggrandizement. After blatantly flattering Felix, Tyrillus delivered his charge against Paul. He said that Paul was a troublemaker who stirred up riots among the Jews and that he had tried to desecrate the temple. Paul responded to the charges with a forthright description of his journey to Jerusalem and the events there. This is exactly what happened to Jesus. Trying to say, and he's stirring up people. He's a troublemaker. And Jesus didn't have to go to jail, fortunately, because he had his plan lined out. And if you remember back, I think it says here now that Paul was down and out the last time we spoke about him, and God told him that you're going to Rome. So he knows he's going to Rome here. So he knows, in my mind, he thinks he can say whatever he wants to whoever he wants, and he's going to end up in Rome. Felix obviously viewed the conflict as a no-win situation. The size of the Jewish community and the Roman citizenship of Paul left Felix in a dilemma. He lacked the wisdom to make an appropriate decision, so he did nothing. He left Paul in prison. God, however, was clearly up to something. Several days after the hearing, God gave Paul an interesting opportunity. he sent the preacher to a congregation of two, Felix and Drusilla. Drusilla was the third wife of the governor, and both of them had deserted previous spouses to marry. God equipped Paul with a tailor-made lesson for the two. Verse 25 tells us Paul discoursed, which means to speak back and forth, and alternately to converse with. This is okay, so I'm just reading this next part. He didn't give a sermon. He led Felix and Drusilla in an interactive study. The core of Paul's message was faith in Jesus Christ. And we're going to skip over to the next page, 295, and I'm just reading the top paragraph. And this kind of tells us a who's who here. Remember Herod Agrippa from Acts 12, 19 through 23. He was Drusilla's father. He bestowed on himself the glory due only to God. As a result, he was eaten by worms and then died. You might think having a father who was eaten alive by worms would have some impact. Instead, Drusilla led an adulterous life in spite of all she knew about morality and reverence for God from her Jewish heritage. The generational bondage of pride could have been broken with her father's dreadful demise. Instead, she resisted the message, willingly picked up the chain of pride, and carried on. That's one of the things that my brother and I have talked about. I took my brother to the ranch a couple times. He ended up getting sober and all that, but I was sober for a couple of years before he ever did, which is great. He's doing an amazing job, but that's one of the things that we talked about like a lot before, like generational, like it has to stop somewhere, or it's just gonna keep going. It keeps going. So he's doing good. Hopefully we're definitely have stopped that generational thing. It's easy to pick back up again, but we're both doing good on that, and that is an amazing thing to know that your kids, you've stopped that where they can see it and it's normalized and all that stuff, where it's there, and you talk about it, you stop at the store, and it's normalized, a generational thing that just happens, and then you can stop it. You can be that person that stops that generational curse on your family. Even with, mental health is a totally different thing, but you can seek help, and also seek help from the preacher and study it. There's things in the Bible that tells us about everything in life, about how to get past certain things and reach out for prayer. And if you can openly talk about this stuff, then people will relate to you, and people maybe think, okay, well, if that guy can do it, maybe I can do it. Okay, I always get off track. 298 is where I'm at. And I'm reading Acts 25, 13 through 22. 25, 13 through 22. And after certain days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there is a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die before that which is accused, have the accusers face to face, and have a license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Just to kind of talk about what's going on here, they're doing the same thing that they did with Jesus. They can't find a way to kill him with Jewish law, and they're trying to get him to the Romans, and the Romans are like, no, you're not doing it right. Just like we did with Jesus. Therefore, when they were come hither without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth. Against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought some non-accusations of such things as I supposed. But he had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and of one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. But when Paul had appealed to the reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. Festus is trying to get him killed. He's trying to do what they did to Jesus. He's trying to get in this guy's ear first and have his story told first before he hears Paul's. Just like a little kid when they run to their parents, they want to be there first to tell their side of the story. I'm going to read out of page 299. Acts 25 begins with the arrival of new leader of the province. Festus replaced Felix, but Paul remained in prison. The Jewish leaders immediately appealed to the new governor to have Paul return to Jerusalem for the trial. Though 2 years had passed, and they were either very hungry or had abandoned their vow not to eat until Paul was dead. This is the same people here, if you remember from a couple weeks or last week. We're not going to eat until he's dead. Well, like she said here, they gave up on that pretty quick. They still harbored such hatred of the apostle that they could think only of killing him. Rather than be returned to Jerusalem, Paul appealed to Caesar, which he did. Why he did remains a mystery. After Festus heard Paul's defense, he said, in effect, I would turn him loose, but since he appealed to Caesar, I send him to Rome as a prisoner. And you guys see what's going on here. He's headed to Rome. It's where God told him he was going, was to Rome. Now he's headed there. We cannot judge from the words of Festus whether Paul might have been freed. What we do know is that the apostle is about to travel to Rome at last, but first he has one more chance to present the gospel. King Agrippa and his wife Bernice came to Caesarea to pay respects to the new governor. Festus told them about Paul, and they decided to hear from the apostle. And Paul had done with Felix, and as Paul had done with Felix and Drusilla, he preached to the new trio. Festus' response contains a fascinating statement. He was at a loss how to investigate. Paul's claims that a dead man named Jesus was alive. I remember sharing with a loved one and usually I try to skip these things for time and not to read, but this is pretty good here. I just wanted to read this to you. I remember sharing with a loved one how I know Christ is alive. He said, I believe in reincarnation and I believe a spiritual presence exists rather than a certain God. He continued by repeating the words, I believe, over and over. Suddenly God gave me such a strange insight, and I was overwhelmed at the difference between my loved one and me. He believed the things had been taught through New Age philosophy. I just didn't believe. I knew. I gently said to him, my God is not just someone I believe in. He is someone I know. I've felt his presence. I've seen his activity. I've experienced his deliverance. I've been touched by his healing. I've witnessed answered prayers. I've heard him speak straight to me through his words. Yes, I believe, but more than that, I know. And that's something that when I read this, I was like, wow, that's awesome. Yes, I believe. Yes, I believe. But taking it one step person, I know, like certainty that I know that I'm going to heaven. And that is an amazing thing right there. And that's the way, going back to Paul, knowing he's going to Rome, we know we're going to heaven. So, really there's not much anybody can do to us here that is going to stop us from what Jesus has promised us by dying on the cross and salvation, that we get to go to heaven and we get to see loved ones and we get to experience all the things of heaven. I've said this many of times as a kid, and I explain it to towns like, what do you think heaven's going to be like? When I was a kid, I always thought popcorn. Popcorn is there. It sounds like that, but we get to experience all these things in heaven that we've talked about and we study about and we pray about, and we get to see prayers answered. That's what we said at the very first of this. And this is a little glimpse of heaven, what we have down here on earth with our church family and our family that God gives us. I didn't have a family for a while, and now having one now, and the things that you do when that's been taken away and you get it back, a lot of the little petty stuff is gone, especially whenever you get a second chance. Let me finish this. My loved one said nothing more, but I knew he heard my heart. Dead prophets simply don't save, guide, heal, deliver, answer prayers, or speak through an ancient text with the relevance of the morning's newspaper. We don't follow a dead Messiah. And that's what's different. Our Messiah died on the cross. He had to be raised again before us, for us to have salvation. And that's what makes it different than a lot of the gods and goddesses and all the other things that, you could get lost in very fast. Let me see here.
Well, I didn't think much about how superstitious they were, that they believed in reincarnation.
Yes.
They believed that you come back as somebody else, so him coming back as himself completely blew everything out of the water.
Yes, and the people saw him. I have a note here about the book Case for Christ. I don't know if you guys read that or have seen the movie, but some people said that he wasn't all the way dead and he just was healing for 3 days. Well, if that's the case, then he's going to have holes in his hands. He's going to have a hole in his side. He doesn't have any skin left on his body and all that stuff. You want some time?
No, you just go ahead.
Okay. Let me, because I have written down that I'm going to read this whole next one, but I think I meant to skip this a little bit. Let me read the Bible part first. Acts 26, 24 through 32. This may be where I was getting my other stuff. Acts 26, 24 through 32. All right, here we go. As thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself. Much learning doeth make thee mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. For the king knoweth of these things, before whom also I speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know thou believest. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. This is what I was saying here, is one of the most sad things that you ever, as a kid, I could just remember thinking, man, what a terrible thing to ask for Paul to hear it, that you almost did it. Now, Paul, if it's me thinking that, what else could I have done? What else could I have done? In verse 28, then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And Paul said, I would to God that not only thou, but also that all hear me this day were both almost, and altogether such as I am, except these bonds. And when he had thus spoken, the king rose up, and the governor, and Bernice, and they that sat with them. And when they were gone aside, they talked between themselves, saying, this man doeth nothing worthy of death or of bonds. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, this man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. And that's what he was saying, and that we talked about a second ago. Festus is trying to get a little scapegoat there. He's saying, well, I was going to release him, but he appealed himself to Caesar, so now I have to keep him. And we don't know if that's true or not, obviously. More than likely, this guy's going to keep him in there no matter what, as much as he can. Let me read a little bit here. I think I didn't write it down where I was going to do on this one. But let me just read, and I'll see if I can figure it out. 303. My advice to anyone investigating the matter of Christ's existence would probably be these two things. Open your heart to the possibility of Christ's authenticity by coming to church and getting to know Christian people. That's what we're doing here. That's what you stay a little bit after church. I know it's always busy for me putting stuff up and whatnot, but just knowing the people that come to church and hearing some of their stories, and that they actually, these people, we all care about each other, and we want to help, and we want to pray, and we want to do what we can. That's, if you're new to Christianity, that's what she's trying to say here. Just come to church and open up to some Christian people. Ask Christ if he's real, then be honest and open enough to watch for him to reveal himself. And that's where I have Case for Christ. It's say Lee Strobel. If you haven't read that book, it's amazing. The guy's wife praying for him all the time, and he's an investigative journalist, and he sets out to prove that Christ doesn't exist. And all of his ways to prove that he doesn't exist, he finds out that he does. And it's, some people have to come around it that way to try and prove something wrong and to figure it out. There's a movie about it too, but it's a really good book. Good investigators ask certain questions: who, what, where, when, how. The context of Acts 26 shows that we may know who is in control and even what he's doing and where he's leading, but we rarely guess when and how. Let's take the Jewish leaders and Paul as an example of our inability to know these things. Neither Paul nor the Jewish leaders understood when. Paul didn't know when God would fulfill his promise. Paul knew he had called him and what Christ had called him to do. He even knew where. God was going to send him to Rome, but Paul might never have guessed he would still be sitting in jail 2 years after the promise. That's why he probably asked God many times when. Time means so much to you and me when God sheds light on the ministries. He wants to fulfill our promises. He plans to keep. We usually assume he means right now. A study of the Jewish patriarchs, however, proves that years may separate God's promise and its fulfillment. Not 1 minute was wasted, but God rarely seems to fulfill his revealed plan when we expect. I just thought about this while we were talking about that, reading that. Towns had a birthday last Friday. On Halloween's his birthday. Saturday had his party, and we've been giving him a little bit of money each week if he does good on his spelling test. But he had some money saved up, and he picked out a Lego he wanted. And Towns is the worst. If you order something, he'll ask you 300 times a day when it's getting here. And he doesn't know when Wednesday is or whatever. So the whole time I told him, I wish I could show you my phone. The whole time I told him I needed to take his money, his cash to the bank, but I already ordered it. And when it came in yesterday. But he was like more excited than he would have been if he got a gift. But if I had told him I ordered it, then it would have been every 5 minutes. He was already asking me to see it. Can I see that on your phone? When are you going to order? When are you going to the bank? I was like, I haven't been to the bank yet. But that's where we are here, just like a now 7-year-old child. If we know that God's promises something, or we know something's going to happen, then we want it now. And we want to ask about it 100 times before it happened. Likewise, the Jews didn't know when God would fulfill his promise. They believed God would send a Messiah. That was the answer to who. They also knew what he would come to do, bring salvation. They were certain where, Israel, then all parts of the world. But they didn't understand when. They were still looking for a Messiah, even though he had already come. Sometimes we can keep asking when God is going to do something he's already done. And just like, excuse me, thou persuaded me to be a Christian. How sad that is. How sad is that for the Jewish people that don't believe Jesus has come back? I mean, what are we doing here if we don't believe in the Bible and we don't believe Jesus? I mean, what is there to look for? What is there if we don't believe that? I think I'll stop there because I didn't really write down. I don't want to read all that. I was going to do 4, but I'm just going to stop there, and we'll catch up next week on some, and I'll give him a little time. Not much.
About one of them for each family. If you have to have another one, we can make you another copy. Reason I'm trying to say for each one for a family, so you work together.
It's the same one.
Now, this is the temperaments, yeah, and this is not what I gave you Sunday. Yeah, this is completely different. Yeah, completely different, but this will help you. This is just some psychology here. Everybody needs a little psychology. And you can look this up on the internet if you want to, and kind of goes into detail a little more. I don't know to what extent. I didn't really study it that much on the internet because I've went through this a few times through the years and trying to help people understand about themselves. So it's broken down, and I do have more, but I don't want to give you the whole load at once.
There's a book by Tim LaHaye called Transform Temperaments.
Do what now?
There's a book by Tim LaHaye called Transform Temperaments that does this.
That-
Tim LaHaye.
Yeah, yeah,
Transform
yeah,
Temperaments.
yeah. I used to study a lot of Tim LaHaye stuff. In fact, that might have been where I started doing this. I don't know. I've heard a lot of preachers won't kind of get into psychology, and I don't much either, but this is such a good help. It was for me, and maybe not as much for me. It is, if you're a leader, it's good for sure to know this. So if you're in a family, you're going to be a leader one way or the other somewhere, sometime, aren't you? With your children or grandkids or whatever it might be with one another. But to try to figure out why we do what we do. So there's 4 here in the choleric. Let me get the next page here. And phlegmatic, melancholy. Some say melancholic, but call it melancholy. Sanguine or sanguine. Do what?
I said, that's me.
So if you'll look these over and answer those, as I've said, the same way you would with the gifts that I was telling you about, from 1 to 10, kind of grade yourself when you get home, maybe look it over with each other, and you'll get to know each other. You'll get to know your children better, and so on. And even though you may have, you may be, well, you are one of these, you got to be, but you will also have some of the other traits, I guess. You'll have a main primary temperament. One of these will be a primary temperament. Mine is melancholy, but also have some of the other strengths and a whole lot of the other weaknesses. So that's what we want to do, is to, if we know our strengths, then we know what we're capable of doing in our life, not just as far as physical things in life, work and so forth, but also in our life spiritually. And that's what we're talking about in bringing the church together. And ever since we've started studying the gifts and working on this, I noticed, and I've sat back there and counted when Matthew's up here, and there's always been one or two more people every Sunday. It was 40 last Sunday, and that's good compared since COVID. You know, every church has been having a problem, and hopefully there'll be more than that this Sunday. Now, I'm not saying numbers important, but numbers are people. Is what I'm saying. And that's what we want to do, is help other people. And that's what you'll see as you study this. And as you read the Bible, you're going to find a lot in how we're supposed to help other people. And it goes along with your spiritual gift, whatever that might be. And I've already told you mine and hers. Mine is exhortation, and hers is serving or ministry. Ministry is serving. And there's scriptures for that as well, and I'll be giving you some of those to back up each one of these gifts. Maybe one scripture or two scriptures, because that's what it's all about, is staying with the Word. Because you hear everything in the world, especially nowadays. I was watching some different speakers. I even hate to call them pastors or preachers or even churches, as I see them on television. And so many of them, to me, are just mocking God, maybe blaspheming. I don't know, because they're so far away from the Bible, it's unreal. Well, that's what the Bible tells us is going to happen in the last days, right? There will be a great falling away. Oh, it won't be me. I've talked to a lot of people through the years who said that. Oh, man, I'll never fall away, preacher. A few years later, sometimes just a few weeks later, they've hit the bottom. And some of them are still out there and been out there for many, many years. We were talking about somebody the other day and trying to help them get back in church. Used to be so faithful in church, worked with the youth, and if I remember, maybe taught a class and so forth. Now where are they? And I know a lot of preachers myself that's quit preaching and back in the world and doing all the things of the world. And you say, well, they probably wasn't even called to preach. Well, I don't know about that. And you don't even know if I'm called to preach or not. That's what we're talking about. We get to know one another, and we work with one another as they are, right? If it's the President of the United States, it may be an honor to have him sit on the front row, but Jesus said we need to be careful about doing that. But when the beggar comes in, we'll say, sit back there somewhere. Man, smell you plumb up here. That's why so many people are. So they forget about that word love, and it's all through the Bible. There in 1 John, you find that so much. So we need to know something about ourselves and who we think we are. Maybe you already know, like some have sat through this. I think Mary has sat through it before, and you all have sat through it, I think. But that don't mean we still remember it, because we tend to forget. That's in there too, right? We're human beings, and we tend to forget these things. That's one reason why we're here tonight. That's one of why you are. The Bible says fellowship with one another. It may not be in the church. It might be at the beauty shop. It might be at the workplace. It might be on the road somewhere. But you fellowship one with the other. In fact, that's why Romans 12 starts off, isn't it? Before it gets into the principal gifts, your main primary gifts, and that's what you need to know about. Like I said, mine's exhortation. Well, that's what I'm doing right now. It's just a part of me, and if you're around working with me or whatever it might be, you'll hear that. It's just a part of me. And that's what'll happen when you start finding out. Then you'll recognize that you're that way. And then when you're talking to somebody else, and then in your mind, you're thinking about some of these. Maybe you read over it and you say, well, I know why they're that way, right? Well, God made us that way. We're all different. And if we know somebody's different than we are, then we try to deal with them how they are. You know, as new people come into church, I try to see them as they are and try to work with them as they are. And if we know what our spiritual gifts are, when I say that, that's why I say there's so much to say. You got the primary gift. I've got the gift of exhortation. It doesn't stop there. You have other gifts, see, and that's where we get into the administration and ministries and motivational and so forth. We use all of those some way, somehow in our life. Is that right? And so we need to try to figure out. So if you would take those home, look them over, and try to figure out who you are. And you say, boy, I wouldn't want to be that person. Well, I wouldn't want to be a woman either. So, you know why you wouldn't want to be that person? Because you're this person, right? And you want to be that person because they're this person. And that's what we're trying to kind of get settled in our mind. Then we have the gifts. Everybody got one of these, the gifts of the Spirit, and the prophecy and ministry and so forth. Try to figure out which one of those that you are, and then once we kind of get this together, I mean, you can tell people who you believe that you are, and you may change, by the way. A few months from now, you say, you know, I thought I was, but then you change your mind. There's nothing wrong with that, because you'll find that in these strengths and weaknesses, and then knowing that, I've got a whole list of things that each one of these are capable of doing in church work, whatever it might be. Even though a church like this may be small in number, there's still a lot of things that we can do. And this church is small right now, but and a lot of people don't know it. Other preachers come by, you know, and talk about the attendance. I said, we may be little, but we're loud. And then I tried to explain to them. I said, well, we support a lot of missionaries. We've helped build a lot of church buildings. We've helped build youth camps. We've helped build Brother McDonald's place down there through the years, and Calvary Boys Ranch, and we got a ministry in Stillwell going on right now. We got a ministry in the nursing homes, which is taking place last week. And so how many people did we have in church? You want to count number? You see what I'm saying? We used to do that quite a bit when we were in town before we moved out here. Somehow it dropped off. Then we had, I mean, I'm going on and on. We had at one time, my mother took care of this, and that kind of passed away with her. But we were getting Bibles into countries like Russia that it was against the law to have a Bible. And the way that we would do that, we'd take some of these old Bibles we got, we'd tear Matthew out and put it in an envelope, because they could receive mail, but when they just see a few pages like that, they didn't really know what it was. And then we'd maybe Revelation, John, and so on, in different letters, and send them over there, and then they'd have a rendezvous, put the Bible together, and so they had a Bible. And so we don't know how we're going to stand before God one of these days in doing that kind of work. And to me, that not just because I'm a pastor, even at my age, it gets exciting. It makes me want to do it myself, you know. And so I believe that when you really find out what you're capable of doing. And I know when you were like me, when you were young, I didn't know, I didn't know what the heck I was doing and where I was going. I mean, even after we got married, man, we went over half the world, seemed like, trying to figure out where we're going, what we're doing, and looking for that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and never did find that, and so forth. And so, anyway, that's what I'd like for you to do, and read Romans 12, and we'll be talking about the other as we go on from time to time. Maybe not so much on Sunday morning. I'd rather really do a little more teaching on Wednesday night. But we'll get it done one way or the other. And I think this is probably one of the best ways, don't you? Where you got it in your hand, and because you're going to forget what I'm trying to say or what I say in the matter of getting in the car, you know. And that's on here, by the way, and how we are. And we read that, and they think, wow. And you're going to find yourself in every one of these, but one of them is going to stand out a little more. And you'll figure out which one of these you are. So, anyway. I can't hear you.
You were talking about psychology books. There's a book I know that he's written, and it talks about these character, temperaments, and it talks about a business that doesn't take regular inventory goes broke. That you look at these inventory and you see what you have that's good.
Yeah.
And you see what you have that you need to work on and get rid of.
Yep. Yep, that's right. And I've got a list of those that I haven't handed out yet. Like I said, I'm trying to give it a little bit at a time. And first thing is figure out if you're a man or a woman, right?